9715.
Hey, and welcome to this week's episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast. We hope that you all had a very Merry Christmas, and we hope you're all doing well going into the new year, despite all of the weird and negative things going on. We're especially happy that you're joining us for this week's installment of Strangeness, and we hope that you'll enjoy it as much as we do. Please don't forget to press the subscribe button so that you can be notified every time we upload a new episode, and please leave us a rating and a review because we love hearing what you think about the show, whether it's good or bad. We do often use the very constructive criticisms that we get to improve different aspects of the show, so we like to hear everything you guys have to say. If you want to contact us for any reason, to offer us criticisms, express your love for the show, if you have a show idea, or just want to say hey, you can contact us via Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, or Instagram. You can also call us and leave a voicemail or text 641-812-2635. If you leave a voicemail there, you can expect to hear it on the next episode. And don't worry about anyone picking up when you call. The number goes straight to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about it ringing to someone's phone. We only announced this because we've had a couple of people express concern about it, and we want you to be assured that you will not be caught up in any awkward conversations with either one of us upon calling this number. So please do so. We love hearing from you. And speaking of voicemails, we did have one this past week, so here it is.
Hello, Samantha and Sarah. This is Jeff Berry. I love your show, and I had a show idea. High-powered microwaves are being used as weapons in something that is called the Havana Syndrome. It has caused illness to embassy employees in foreign countries, in Russia and Cuba, and I'll be interested in learning more about that. And I'm going to send you a link to an article I just read about it. Also, along with that, the threat of electromagnetic pulse as a weapon. I thought those would be interesting ideas, and it sounds like something that y'all would like to cover. Thank you.
So, a very special thank you goes out to Jeff for that suggestion. In recent past episodes about targeted individuals, we did touch a little bit on Havana Syndrome, although I guess we really didn't call it by its name, and it was really somewhat of a brief mention. It would be a great topic to do a full episode on because there are really several incidents of diplomats being affected by this that we could talk about, and there have been government talks about the situation that seem to be somewhat ongoing, so it wouldn't be that difficult to dedicate a full episode to Havana Syndrome at all. So thank you again for taking the time to send us that voicemail, and we're really glad that you liked the show and we loved hearing from you.
We had a message come through on our website from David Arvin with a show suggestion that we're definitely interested in. David, if you're listening, we do plan to cover that topic in the near future, and we appreciate you sending it in. We also wanted to say thank you for listening and thank you for commenting on our lighthearted banter, because if there's anything that we get some flack for, it's for that. Listeners either like it or they don't, but we do like to keep things light around here, and we tend to get off subject a little, but we do try to stick to the story as much as possible. But David does say that he enjoys our jokes, so that's awesome, and thank you.
We also got a message on our website from a girl named Kelsey Emmons, so we want to give her a Bigfoot for Breakfast shout out as well. Kelsey just started listening to the show and made a great suggestion also. She suggested that we cover a place called Edinburgh Manor in Scotch Grove, Iowa. This was really cool to hear because we are actually from Iowa, and although Edinburgh Manor is a few hours from where we live, we have actually been fortunate enough to spend some time there. And we stayed the night, so it would be pretty easy to do an episode on this as well, and include some of our own personal experiences from this super creepy place. Thank you so much for your email, Kelsey, and I'm sure that we can come up with an episode for you on Edinburgh Manor in the future.
This week, however, we're going to get into something pretty dang creepy. If you've never heard the stories that come from the Native American lore of the Skinwalkers, as we say, you're in for a treat that will make you think you hear something chasing you as you sprint from your car to your house the next time you pull in after dark.
Which is my everyday, despite Skinwalker knowledge. Because there's also Michael Myers. Anyway.
We're going to start way back in the day with some horrible parts of American history and how the Native American legends of these beings came to be. And although we do love our great country, there are some parts of its past that are kind of hard to swallow. We all learned in history class how America came about, just like we talked about in our Thanksgiving episode. It wasn't all sunshine and roses for anyone, really. Especially not for our Native American citizens who undisputedly occupied this land long before Europeans came over here and took everything over.
But even before we get into that, let's talk about location. Although people claim sightings of skinwalkers to this day all over the United States and beyond, it seems to be that the most frequent locations and actual lore at the local levels are mostly centralized to Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. So we're dealing mostly with the American Southwest here in the Four Corners area where these states meet. And this is because the tribes from which this lore originated are located here. The Navajo is where most of the legend comes from, but the Utes also have long-standing stories regarding skinwalkers as well.
Obviously, the legend of the Skinwalker originates in the incredibly interesting legendary and mystical history of the Native Americans here, and we want to carefully point out the obvious fact that our Irish asses are not Native American, pretty much at all, so we want to express the great respect that we have for these cultures, and we will do our best to give the history, stories, and subject matter that we're including in this episode the dignity that it deserves, because we understand that the legends and lore associated with these tribes is a huge part of their culture and is to be taken seriously.
We're going to start off with a well-known quote from Ronald Reagan. The 9 scariest words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
True story. The mid-1800s were a hard time, and the white settlers were pushing hard to the west in order to expand the United States and claim more land for themselves. The ultimate goal was to remove the Native Americans off of the land that they wanted to claim and onto government-controlled areas so that their land could be occupied by the settlers. The Mexican-American War had finished up with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. So this gave America a bunch of the Southwest that had previously been controlled by Spain. The government wanted to keep expanding to the north as well, so they could take more of Western America.
So from what we can gather, the Skinwalker legend came out of a series of pretty traumatic events within the Navajo tribe that occurred with the invasion of the Europeans to the west. At least the perpetuation of knowledge about skinwalkers. At that time, the Navajo tribe was huge and occupied vast portions of land in Western America with quite a bit of hostility from other smaller tribes within the area, particularly the Ute tribe. The Ute tribe was a long-standing tribe here as well, and when the Europeans began moving to the west into tribal areas, the Utes decided to ally with the government to drive out the Navajo.
In 1863, Kit Carson and General James Charlton led the Canyon Shelley campaign, and this was aimed directly at the Navajo Nation. Things got very tough for these Native Americans during this time. Basically, they began trying to starve them out. They killed their livestock by placing a bounty on them and allowing hunters to go into the land and kill the Native Americans' food for a small amount of payment per animal. They also sought out and destroyed any water sources that may be available to the Navajo people. This kind of worked, but not enough. The Native Americans were definitely feeling this. They were facing pretty big hardships with much less food and dwindling water sources, but they weren't willing to leave their ancestral land so easily. So, a little later, Carson and Charlton decided to send men to just go into the territory and hide out, scouting the Indian people and killing them in small groups or one at a time. They would sneak in under the dark of night and burn their crops as well, further starving them out. All the while, they offered rewards to any Navajo people who would surrender. These rewards came in the form of food and clothing that the Native Americans had been lacking. They wanted them to surrender so that they could move them into other territories that the Europeans didn't want.
This method was called a scorched earth campaign, and it was launched under the orders of our very own American government. This went on for a year, and the Navajo people were suffering. So in the spring of 1864, the Navajos surrendered en masse and took what was called the Long Walk to Fort Sumner, New Mexico. During the Long Walk, over 8,000 Navajo people traveled by foot over 300 miles over the course of 2 months. They were treated horribly, and over 200 Navajo people died while walking. Some others decided to abandon the march, obviously still not trusting the U.S. government, and decided that they would risk it on their own, and they ran for the mountains. The whole time, though, the anger and frustration over losing their land, everything that they had worked for, and losing a good chunk of their loved ones grew among them. Hatred toward the Europeans, and toward the tribes that had helped them destroy the Navajo way of life that they had held so dear was becoming incredibly strong, step by step. They maintained their resolve to someday reclaim their ancestral land and go back home. To them, this was not over.
They were taken to a place called the Bosque Redondo Reservation that turned out to be much less a reservation than an internment camp that they were not allowed to leave. There were soldiers stationed everywhere with guns, and the Native Americans were forced into practicing American civilization day in and day out in an attempt to rid them of their cultural identity and make them assimilate to American culture. A man named James Carleton once said of this Navajo roundup, quote, "If the army placed the Navajo on a reservation far from the haunts and hills and hiding places of their country, they would acquire new habits, new ideas, new modes of life. Civilizing the Navajo could be best achieved through their children. The young ones will take their places without these longings, and thus, little by little, they will become a happy, contented people." End quote.
Of course, the Native American people fought this constantly because, as anyone who is familiar with Native American culture and tradition knows, it is basically the most important thing to them. They, of course, weren't going to give it up and adopt other ideas, especially not from people who killed their families, burned their villages, and forced them into this strange place far away from their homes. The hate and anger built up within the Navajo people who had been imprisoned here, and who could blame them?
After a few years of this, the American government decided that it had made a mistake, and they ended up releasing the Navajo survivors from this camp and allowed them to make the long journey home back to their own land. But things were still hard. Their entire way of life had been disrupted and stripped from them. Everything that they'd accomplished on this land had been torn apart, burned to the ground, and their numbers were much fewer. They were grateful to go home, but they knew that they had a long road to restoring their way of life.
Among these people journeying with them were witch doctors. The idea of the witch doctor among the Navajo wasn't unusual. They were a very spiritual culture, and the practice of a witch doctor was mainly supposed to be about health, balance, and harmony. They would help people individually and also work among the tribe to keep things in check. They would perform various ceremonies throughout a person's life to promote blessing, healing, good luck, and success. These witch doctors were a large part of Navajo culture, and during this time of hardship and suffering, it seems that some of the spiritual leaders lost their hope and their way, turning to a different path that was less about health, balance, and harmony, and more about hate, spite, and revenge, and it consumed their very souls.
There are different levels of priesthood within this art, and supposedly the legend goes that there were certain priests who could choose to use their powers in ways that were not acceptable within the tribe, and because they knew that it wasn't acceptable and they would be punished for it, they kept it a secret. The powers and knowledge that they received were supposed to be used for the good of the people. Some of these people would go through the ceremonial and education routes to gain their knowledge to become a medicine man, but then would decide to use their powers for self-serving and evil purposes. It's said that they would then endure a ceremony that gives them additional powers, and in this ceremony, they must kill another person, typically someone who is a loved one, a very close friend, or a sibling.
So when the Navajo people finally returned to their homeland only to have endured even more suffering, they developed their own suspicions and could only assume that there were witches among them, perpetuating their hardship. This resulted in the Navajo Witch Purge of 1878, in which approximately 40 suspected witches were killed among their people in order to restore balance and harmony within the tribe. But even after the purge, the sneaking suspicion that witches were still living among them went on for a very long time. It is still a legend today, and the stories and sightings of the Skinwalkers live on constantly, especially in the American Southwest.
It's pretty difficult to get information on these beings because the history and stories are typically held close to the Navajo tribe. It's their legend and part of their history. The Navajo people are not generally open about their own legends, and they usually do not share them with people who are not Navajo. For one, it seems that it is just straight up looked down upon. It's none of our business. Also, it seems to be believed that if a Navajo person goes around talking about these shape-shifting priests that are referred to as Skinwalkers, they are said to be opening themselves up for a visit from one, drawing its attention, if you will. So they usually just don't do it. They not only won't discuss the beings with outsiders, but often won't even discuss it with each other. Skinwalkers are thought to be living among them. There's no telling within the Navajo tribe who could be one. This leaves us with some digging to do as far as research goes, and trying to weed out the decently reliable information from the straight-up fiction is very difficult. So bear with us while we do the best that we can not to butcher this legend. But apparently, the first rule about Skinwalkers is you don't talk about Skinwalkers. So we've kind of already messed that up, since that's exactly what we're fixing to do.
In the words of author Jeffrey J. Kripal, the sacred is understood to not be a stable thing out there, but kind of a living energetic presence, power or effervescence interacting within a particular individual or community. Hence, its fundamentally paradoxical structure at once inside and outside, at once mental and material. Clearly, when we're dealing with the monster as a paradoxical manifestation of the sacred, we are not dealing with pure evil, simple destruction, or unmitigated chaos. Nor are we dealing with zoology, or with ordinary fantasy, projection, or cultural discourse, or any other academically correct subjectivism or relativism. Since when does such a discourse carry away your livestock, or a subjective projection melt your dog? I ask again, what are we to do with monsters? With real monsters.
Obviously, when Kripal is talking about melting dogs and disappearing cattle, he's more likely referring to the situations in which UFOs are involved. But this quote can be applied to almost any historical monster in existence that manifests some sort of consequence and influences the world in a physical way, right? Whether we're talking about the physical alterations attributed to UFOs or the large cultural impact of that of Skinwalkers on the Navajo culture, there's plenty of reason to believe it.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
Within several Native American tribes, this really isn't just an urban legend. It's a large part of their culture, and it's very dangerous to get involved in messing with these creatures. The Navajo call them Yi-Nodlushi, and this means, with it, he goes on all fours. After the evil priest completes his ritualistic talk of killing a loved one or a relative, they will gain a whole host of other powers. The main things that a skinwalker is known for is mimicking, shape-shifting, and sometimes even mind control. So you can see why Native Americans wouldn't want them around, and why the witch purge of 1878 may have taken place. They are incredibly dangerous.
So apparently they go through the priesthood and achieve the highest honor that is possible. If they're a person who is good, they will obviously do good things, use their knowledge and power to heal the sick, continue balance within their tribe, and do their part within the universe to create success and good fortune for those around them. They will hold ceremonies and promote beautiful ideals, be an all-around community fellow. Or they might not have that kind of personality at all. It seems that often greed and malice creep into their hearts, much like us ordinary folks, and if they let this overcome them, they may choose to do harm with what they know and what they can achieve. A different kind of ceremony is held for them to achieve a different kind of power that will enable them to use their powers for bad things under the guise of, say, an animal, often a wolf, fox, owl, or crow. The ritual that they undergo involves what we said earlier, the killing of someone that is close to them, often a family member. After everything is done that needs to be, they will have a new set of powers that enable them to take the form of an animal and will often be seen wearing the skin or pelt of animals. This would be an unusual sight because for this reason, it is taboo to wear the skin of an animal other than a sheepskin or a buckskin within the Navajo culture, and they only wear these because they are ceremonial. It seems that whatever skin they're wearing, they will be able to take its form. Think of all the evil, sly things that you could get done. The ways you could sneak up on people if you wanted to watch them.
It does not end there, though. It's even said that they can take the shape of a person. The Native Americans seem to often promote turning away if you should encounter something that you think may be a skinwalker, and to avoid looking directly into their eyes. Supposedly, when in animal form, a shapeshifter or a skinwalker will have astonishingly human-looking eyes. and when in human form, their eyes will seem animalistic. Skinwalkers are said to take on the form of a person and cause them to do things that they would not normally do, and say things that they wouldn't normally say. It's also said that if a skinwalker should happen to be wounded while in their animal form, the wound will also be present in their human form.
This idea is portrayed in the autobiography and life history of Navajo Ashley, which is a very interesting read and is listed in our sources. He tells a story that he heard from his grandmother that goes like this. Someone had gone hunting and shot a coyote that had run into some bushes. The person looked to see which way the animal would come out, then slowly crept to where the coyote had gone. There sat a woman, a skinwalker, with a coyote skin beside her. The hunter said that he did not mean to shoot her and that he thought that she was a coyote. The woman remained there. The person who shot the coyote cleaned off the hook thorns from a cactus and put it on the woman's wounds. He gave her food and water, and after 30 days asked her if she was well again. She said she was, so the man told her to be on her way. She tried to put her coyote skin back on. Then she finally said that if someone's watching, the skin would not do it. The person went over the hill. As he glanced back, the coyote was running the other way, going back to where it had come from.
It sounds like it also isn't uncommon for a skinwalker to be found near a burial site or a cemetery. We realize that this sounds pretty cliche for a creature of lore, but the reason behind this, we think, is pretty creepy. The skinwalker will rummage around inside the grave once they have gotten it dug up to steal belongings that may have been buried with the person inside. But also, an exceptionally long, decomposed corpse will produce a powder along the inside of the grave, and the skinwalker is seeking this as well. They will gather it up, curse it, and use it to poison people. It is said that they will put it in the food and drink of others, and sometimes will blow it into the face of a person that they have met. The inhalation of this cursed powder will make their victim almost instantly shrivel up and die. In the book that we mentioned earlier, Navajo Ashley related that his grandmother told him that the skinwalkers do this as well, except she said that they pinch off pieces of rotted flesh at the joints of someone who is long dead, and then make it into a powder. He goes on to talk about the only potion that can counteract this poison is bile. His family would gather bile from bobcats, wolves, and mountain lions, and a ceremony would be performed.
At one point, he and his family had a problem with a missing sheep, and they thought that this was the work of a skinwalker. So he was pretty much nominated to sit in the corral of sheep through the night and keep an eye on things. They performed the bile ceremony, gave him a sheepskin and a rifle, and left him to it. Of that experience, this was written. There I sat in the night. The moments went by, but I sat still. It was toward morning when the breeze came that the sheep became restless. They made snorting noises when the dogs whimpered and then quieted down. The moon was shining. I put the bullet in the gun. Then I heard it coming, and it came with a loud sound, really loud. It sounded like a horse running. It was in the sheep corral and tried to get the sheep into a corner. It was as big as the finest large dog. This one had red fur and a white streak down its face. Its tail was just hanging there and did not look like it was connected to the body. Maybe it was just sewn on. I think it was either its tail or its claw that was making a sound like a pack rat. I looked very closely and could smell something. As it walked by me, I shot, and it howled like a human.
He went on to talk about later finding out that a man who lived nearby died of a gunshot wound in that exact same area, and he knew that it was him that he had shot. Navajo Ashley states that this was the experience that made him realize that the stories of his childhood were true. There really were skinwalkers.
So while most stories that you hear about skinwalkers will make it seem that they are more of a curious creature, sneaking around behind rocks and trees, stalking you, following you home to mess with you, there is plenty of reason to believe that they are, in fact, actually very dangerous in a sense, and they will simply just kill a person.
A man named Gary Swanson wrote a book called Native American Witches, Curses, and Skinwalkers, in which he details stories from members of a Navajo tribe that he is acquainted with. In one story told by a man named Charlie Whitehorse out of Tempe, Arizona, he had hired a guide named Donnie to assist him through Navajo territory in order to find some symbols inside of a dwelling that he could use to interpret a document. Some Indiana Jones stuff right there. He had been approved to enter the territory for research purposes, but hired the Navajo guide in order to avoid having to show documentation constantly throughout the journey. Long story short, they made it to the ancient dwelling, and they tried to show this place the utmost respect by not touching things that they weren't supposed to. They both expressed nervousness about sleeping near the si.edu, which sounds like it's a large flat stone on the floor of the center of the largest dwelling and is thought to be a portal to the other world. So I could see how it would make a person anxious. The other world is said to be where the Anazazis were, and the si.edu is how they travel between the world of the gods and the mortal earth. They did end up staying the night there since it got too dark, and they started a fire inside one of the smaller dwellings a distance away from the si.edu. At some point during the night, the narrator says that he felt something brush against his face and it startled him awake. He opened his eyes, but he was careful not to move in case someone was around. He could easily see by the light of the moon that there was someone there, a creature inside the dwelling with him. He could see that the dark, shadowy, tall, and lanky creature was coming his way, and he could see that his guide was sleeping upright against the wall with his tarp over his face. So he knew that he was on his own and that his friend was totally unaware of this visitor. Charlie had already slowly fished his hand into his pocket and had a hold of the handle of his .38. So as the creature neared him, he was able to quickly pull his weapon and shoot at close range. He said that the creature immediately began screeching like a cheetah. And as the creature was stumbling around inside of the dwelling, Charlie pulled out his flashlight. In the light of the flashlight, he could see that the face of the creature had been totally shredded and the creature was stumbling closer and closer to the edge of the cliff until finally it fell off, and as it hit the bottom, it ran away. For sure, he figured that his guide Donnie would be awake now from all of the commotion, but as he looked over to the wall, Donnie was still slumped against it with the tarp over his head. But now, in the light of the flashlight, he was easily able to make out what looked like a pool of blood, gathering in Donnie's lap and around where he was sitting. He pulled off the tarp to reveal that Donnie's throat had been cut and Donnie had died.
The story pretty much ends with Charlie waiting until morning, and after he covered Donnie's body with their tarps and piled rocks all around to show respect, he walked back to the car, all the way watching for the Skinwalker, but never seeing it again. I really felt that they left us hanging there. Did he call the cops? Did they believe his story? Holy shit! This is told in the book to be true, and that makes it obviously super horrifying.
One of the reasons that the Native American people are so determined to avoid drawing the attention of a Skinwalker is simply because if you catch one's attention, it's pretty dang difficult to get rid of it. Apparently, the Skinwalker will become fixated on you, and you will be hunted. But it sounds almost like they prefer to stalk their prey, play with it. A lot of stories in which someone has encountered a Skinwalker by accident will initially get away from it and make it home. It is only afterward that events will be set into motion that make them understand that the Skinwalker is still present and has ill intentions for them. The hunted will be plagued by horrid nightmares, possibly illness, knocking at their windows and doors at all hours of the night, hearing strange animalistic cries from the night outside their home, scurrying sounds across their rooftops, fleeting faces in your windows, and moving shadows across your yard. You know, things of that nature.
The only way to detach yourself from the ill will of a Skinwalker is to find a shaman or a medicine man and ask them to perform a ceremonial blessing over you for protection.
Hopefully, it's a good medicine man. A man named Barre Tolkien, who we will reference later in more detail in this episode, had a former student who ended up being a medical doctor. He told a story to Tolkien later regarding one of his patients who he thinks had an encounter with a Skinwalker. It goes like this. A young man in Tuba City, Arizona was repairing his motorcycle outside of his home one day when suddenly the gasoline he was using as a cleaner exploded in his face. He was taken to the nearby public health service hospital where the doctors quickly treated him and stabilized his condition. The boy insisted that the explosion had been caused somehow by a certain older woman who he believed to be a Skinwalker, and he begged the doctors not to let that woman into the hospital. The doctors, of course, assured him that he was fine and he was on the mend and that his burns had nothing to do with witchcraft. Nonetheless, that particular woman was found roaming the halls of the hospital on several occasions and had to be forcibly removed. And although the boy's burns were starting to heal properly, he did die suddenly in the hospital for no apparent reason.
So these Skinwalkers will take a human form much of the time, being a normal person. They will live among the people of their tribe, and their friends and family are often none the wiser. And then in secret, they carry on with this second life, and nobody knows. Nobody must know except for other Skinwalkers within the area. Which leads us to our next point. In many sources, it sounds as though these Skinwalkers are thought to lead very secluded lives. But then in other sources, it sounds more like there's somewhat of a secret society of people who will gather in the forest sometimes in secret or in caves in order to hold initiation ceremonies and perform dark ceremonial rites. They will gather to use black magic all at once to create bigger damage to a victim or to a group. It sounds like activities like necrophilia, cannibalism, and incest are somewhat common practices as well among these people, which brings me to the Stephen King movie.
Yeah, I thought about that. What was it called where he turns into a cat?
Skinwalkers.
Oh, it was? Really? It was called Skinwalkers. We used to watch that a lot, and I never made that.
They were like cat people, and he like banged his mom.
Yeah, he did bang his mom. Yeah.
It was Skinwalkers.
So all of these qualities are pretty terrifying, but the one that I find the scariest is their supposed ability to get into your mind. They know how to read you, what your next move might be, and if you suspect them, because they know what you're thinking. They not only have the power to completely overtake your body, but they also do it remotely, guiding you along, controlling your thoughts and your behavior.
Another source said that they even have the power to call upon the spirits of the dead, to reanimate a corpse, and attack their enemies or play tricks on the loved ones of the dead, which seems especially cruel. Now we're necromancers.
Yeah. They got
Animal necromancers.
all kinds of things going on with these guys. Another source said that they have the power to even call upon this.
I just said that.
I said it so professionally too. You know, I had it going. It was going good. Anyway, let's move on to their enormously terrifying appearance. They may sometimes look like an ordinary animal. Sometimes they look bigger, or something is just a little off about it. Despite their sometimes mostly ordinary appearance, they will have a ridiculous amount of strength or be able to run faster than your car, for example. They are agile and usually leave larger than normal tracks. They don't seem quite fully animal, and when they are human, they aren't quite fully human. And even just sighting one always seems to bring bad luck.
In an essay by Tolkien, that is listed in our sources if you're interested in its entirety, which we recommend, he tells a story of a Navajo friend of his that was driving in a truck near the town of Red Mesa, in which he, quote, noticed a dog-like animal running along parallel to him about 50 yards away from the highway. No matter how fast he went, the dog not only kept up, but kept looking at him intently. Finally, the dog disappeared, but later in the day, Beret states, my friend drove off the road for no apparent reason, wrecking his car and coming close to being killed. That reminds me of the rabbit from the witch, the cave, the Bell Witch. The rabbit followed the guy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Another story that Tolkien tells in his essay is this. Another friend who once worked for the Navajo Nation police told me that he pulled over a speeding pickup west of Dinahotso just after dark, and he walked up to the driver's window, shined his flashlight inside. There he saw 4 human figures, each with the head of a dog. Almost in unison, they turned and looked at him. He turned off his flashlight, returned to his car, drove directly to Kayenta, and tendered his resignation from the force. Which, hell yes.
So one thing that I have often noticed in our reading this week about skinwalkers is some contradiction with appearance and movement. Some will say that they look just like the animal that they've taken the form of, except for maybe some big differences in eyes in the way that they move. Like we said earlier, they're often said to be pretty agile and astonishingly fast, while others claim to see them walk around on 2 legs just as naturally as a human being would. Like this story from Thought Catalog. This didn't happen to me, but a very close friend of mine, they say. I've heard a lot about coyotes and skinwalkers and had a weird experience or two with coyotes. The creepiest was waking up to my sleeping bag being surrounded by paw prints without ever having heard them through the night. But never anything paranormal, so to speak. Patrick's story, however, kept me from going back to a favorite backcountry secret stash.
He was leaving the area one morning. He had been camping there a couple of days, and he said that there was a coyote that always seemed to be close by, like in his peripheral vision, but never overt. He loaded up his truck and started to drive down the wash out to the fire road. At the end of the wash, he could see that the coyote was following him. When he pulled onto the road, it was running next to him. Now he was kind of freaked out, so he sped up. So he said he was going 35 or so, and it was running along beside him. Definitely not possible. When he looked back, the coyote was running on 2 legs and was wearing what Patrick said looked like buckskin pants. An instant later, it was a person wearing a coyote fur keeping pace with his truck. When he looked again, it was gone. We never went back to the grove after that.
See, that's where we're stupid. I feel like we would go back every day.
Like
a
immediately.
couple of idiots.
I feel like I would have just slammed on my brakes and been like, who are you? What just happened? Keanu!
I feel like one of these days you're going to catch me like in the taxidermy shop trying on animal skins to see what happens.
Okay, that's weird, but okay.
Look at my hooves. I have an otter. That would be fun.
Yeah, no.
I want to be an otter.
Don't do it.
Clack, 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 my rocks.
Anywho.
Oh, but then other sightings paint a different picture in their appearance and in their movements. We read a lot of accounts in which the Skinwalker is claimed to be incredibly obvious. They are often described as looking like a hollowed out version of the animal, gaunt, sickly, as if they have indeed taken the form of the animal, but they don't seem fitted to the skin they are trying to disguise themselves in. We also have read several accounts in which the movements of the Skinwalker are incredibly awkward, jolty, twitchy, or slow and misguided looking. So that would be me. I would be the clumsiest fox, like ever.
Same.
Tripping over my own tail and stuff, but obviously I'd be chasing it because you'd have to. I mean, you have to chase your tail.
Yep, it's a right.
So here's one story that we found on Thought Catalog that we thought was super creepy, and I'm pretty sure that we've told this story once before, but it's definitely worth another round. So the story goes, quote, "My uncle is Mexican and Native American. This happened in the Mojave Desert in Southern California. He was driving around with his girlfriend late at night and they saw something that looked like a huge black dog on the side of the road. He slowed down and the dog began crossing the road, but instead of walking like a normal dog would, this thing moved like a toy rocking horse. He said it stopped in the middle of the road and stared right at them, and its eyes had a red glow. My uncle is the most badass person I know, and it scared the crap out of him." That sounds like something that was similar to Bray Road, too.
I think we talked about it in Bray Road,
Yeah,
that episode.
Weird, awkward movements.
Yep, I think that's where that story was told before. We have told it. Skinwalkers are blamed in Native American legend for all kinds of things. Drought, sickness, death of livestock, bad fortune, windstorms, and various other tragedies affecting their well-being. That was part of the reason for the Navajo witch purge of 1878. Even after the Navajo could return to their land, things were never the same. They not only had to start all over after the Europeans came through destroying their waterways, they now had numerous people crossing their land in order to move to the west, hunting their food, driving their animals out of the land completely, more squabbles with the army. During the time before they could come back, while they were still in the concentration camps at Bosque Redondo, they were suffering so much there that it was during this time that the Native American people were really coming into this dark magic and using the art of shape-shifting to escape these conditions. Beyond that, they were so filled with hate over the things that they had lost, that the dark arts just stuck with them and consumed them. So when the natives traveled back, they knew that there were some dark shaman among them, and they weren't completely sure who. Then one day, they found inside of a body the Treaty of 1868. Wrapped up inside of the treaty were artifacts associated with witches. In case we didn't mention it before, the Treaty of 1868 was the treaty signed so that the Navajo people could return to their homeland, or a small portion of it, after enduring so much suffering at the Army's internment camps. When this was found on the native land, so began the witch hunt and the assassination of 40 suspected culprits. Obviously, the dark magic didn't stop there, though. Skinwalkers are still spotted to this day, and suspected of tons of trickery around the American Southwest.
Several sources that we read were liking the Skinwalkers to the European werewolf. Where the correlations are there, kind of, there are so many differences as well. Obviously, the shape-shifting aspect is similar. However, that seems to be about it. The Skinwalker seems to be able to shapeshift into its animal of choice and is able to do it when they want, whereas the werewolf shifts by night whether they like it or not. Also, where the werewolves are unwillingly turned into this creature, the Skinwalkers wanted these powers. They asked for them and underwent certain ceremonial rites to achieve them. While the werewolf may not actually be evil per se, the Skinwalker certainly seems to be. The werewolf is also portrayed as being somewhat unconscious after the transition to the animal and doesn't seem to remember the evil that they had done during their time as a wolf. The Skinwalker seems aware and intentional, still having human qualities. Where a werewolf will lose all control and kill whoever they come across, just to do it in an animalistic fashion, the Skinwalker's actions seem calculated and intelligent, and an interaction with one doesn't always mean death at all.
The Legends of America website has a few of these stories. This one almost sounds kind of silly, but for real, this would freak me right out. A man was making repairs on his old ranch home when he began to hear loud laughter coming from the nearby sheep pen. Thinking he was alone, he went to investigate and found all of the sheep except for one huddled up in one corner of the pen. There was a lone ram separated from the group that was standing upright and laughing in a very human manner. And the man locked eyes with the ram. He sees that the ram's eyes are not that of an animal, but very like a human. The animal then casually just walked away on all four legs. That supposedly happened in Tuba City, Arizona, just outside of Monument Valley. So that's the second story we've got from Tuba City, which makes me think that we need to visit.
Road trip. Where's Tuba City?
Arizona.
Oh yeah, you just said that, didn't you?
I did. I literally just said it.
How close is it to Tombstone?
Don't know, but we could make the trip either way. If we're in Arizona, let's just visit all of it. Roswell, Tombstone, Yuba City, you know.
Is it Tuba City or Yuba City?
It's Tuba. It's Yuba County that we did our other podcast on.
I think I would just walk away too, straight to the livestock trailer to load up all of those damn sheep and take them to the sale barn.
Absolutely.
The end. Farewell, Bahram you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. From what we can read, and we can read,
can we though?
The key to getting rid of and even weakening a skinwalker enough to kill it is to find out who they are. Once they are revealed for who they really are, the Navajo legend seems to say that the skinwalker will get sick and die for all of the wrongs that they have inflicted against others. And there are plenty of wrongs to talk about, but typically because according to various sources, including a personal essay by a man that we talked about earlier named Beret Tolkien, in which he states that, quote, a skinwalker is supposed to gain their powers by ruining those of others. That is to say, by using means which we would call competitive and aggressive. They seek to become strong by making others weak, become healthy by making others sick, become wealthy by making others poor, and so on. End quote.
There's always a price that must be paid. There are a few interesting stories within this essay by Beret Tolkien as well. If a person is found to be a skinwalker among the Navajo people, the natives believe that they have given up their right to be human and have succumbed to the dark arts. They should be killed. At the very least, they are banished from the tribe. We can't imagine that any person seeking this sort of evil power wouldn't be aware of this. So likely, one could surmise that this was an intentional secret transition to what some would call the dark side. And they had some sort of discontent already on their heart to walk through a door like this, fully knowing the repercussions that would follow.
Other than calling them out by name and identifying them, it sounds like the only other way to kill a skinwalker is to shoot it with a bullet dipped in white ash. But it must be shot in the head or the neck. And with the speed and agility that they possess, it sounds like a pretty difficult thing to do. This is why most people seek the help of a native shaman to get rid of a skinwalker who is causing trouble or one who has targeted a person.
Some of the stories in our episode came from the Phoenix Enigma website and were written by a man named Corey Daniel in 2015. We use these stories because he claims to have been working on a road crew with several Navajo men, and these stories were relayed to him during this time.
These more modern accounts seem to depict them as mostly being alone. And this makes sense, but some of the older Navajo stories make it seem as though the skinwalkers aren't necessarily just some individual person seeking out these powers and becoming a skinwalker, but it almost seems more like there are groups of them who teach each other, work together, and pass their evil knowledge down from one generation to the next. And then possibly they are seen alone while out hunting or completing a task for the group. I'm really working on figuring out where I heard this next story, and if I can find it, I will put it on our list of sources. But there is one that started out with a young woman in a dwelling in the woods with her younger brother. She saw two men in the woods, and she heard one of them make a comment about seeing her alone in the dwelling and stated, "Good, now I can get that girl." Of course, she got scared and she made a plan. She and her brother dug a hole in the dirt floor of the dwelling that had led to the outside. She told her brother that if they hear anyone coming in the night, he was to go to the hole and sneak out into the forest and run as fast as he could to get their family, while she fought off the men as long as she could. Of course, this did happen, and the boy ran to get the family. Back at home, where the family was, the older brother was not there because he was out hunting, and often he just would stay in abandoned dwellings in the woods while they were out. The story jumps to him. He is out hunting and comes across a cave in the forest in which he finds a large group of people, and in the center of the cave are piles of human bones. Bones and remnants of human people and animals also used to decorate the walls of the cave, and he knew immediately that these were people who were learning to be wolves. Of course, he was captured. While he is a prisoner, they try to make him eat meat, but he knows that this meat is human, so he pretends to eat it, but he actually slips it into his shirt. The story states, he doesn't know that this meat is his sister. While in the cave, he notices a girl's head hanging on the wall, and the story states again, he doesn't know that this is his sister. Eventually, everyone in the cave goes to sleep, and he can escape. This works fine, but as he is leaving, he accidentally makes a bunch of noise when he runs into a barrier that they had constructed to catch him escaping. So he runs as fast as he can into the woods. He ends up finding a large animal hole and uses a plant to disguise it while he hides. He hears them running all around him while he is hiding, some in human form, some in wolf form. Eventually they leave and he's able to run home, and this is when he makes his escape. Later on, at a ceremony within his own tribe, he sees the leader of this clan from the cave acting totally natural like he is just part of the tribe. So the boy takes aim with his bow and arrow and shoots him dead. And that's the end. Sometimes these Navajo stories just have kind of a matter-of-fact ending. Like it's just over. They don't tie up the loose ends that I need. I need resolution.
Like, where's all the rest of them?
Yeah, like...
Does he ever find out that it's his sister? What do you do with the meat in his shirt?
Oh, I can tell you. There were dogs at the opening of the cave when he was trying to escape that would bark in case he escaped, and as he passed by them, he gave them that piece of meat. I forgot to mention that.
A man named James Donahue wrote an article called Navajo Skinwalkers and Shapeshifters that is listed in our sources, in which he detailed his own interesting encounter with a skinwalker. He and his wife were living with a Navajo medicine man near the Four Corners area, and this man gave him a lot of insight regarding practitioners of black magic within the Navajo. He states that he was told the practitioner offers no outward signs until you either are the subject of the craft or you are allowed to see. He goes on to tell a story of his own experience with what he believed to be a shapeshifter. He states, quote, "It was a windy afternoon and the sands of the high desert were turning the sky yellow and partly obscuring the sunlight. We were at the house alone. The dogs in the yard began barking and carrying on. My wife looked out and announced that there was a wolf in the yard. We both ran outside to look at the creature, only to find it and the dogs had disappeared behind an old hogan that was used as a family home before the government built the conventional house that we occupied. When we looked, we saw the large paw prints of the wolf, but there was something strange as well. The paw prints turned into human footprints, small like the feet of a petite woman, before they disappeared at the wall of the hogan. It was as if the wolf my wife had seen had turned into a human after it was out of our sight, and then miraculously this person walked through the wall of a locked building. Since we did not have a key, there was no way to enter the old hogan and learn anything more. We believed we were visited by one of the witches in the coven that day. As we stood there, finding it hard to believe what we were looking at, my wife suddenly came to her senses. 'Quick,' she said, 'run into the house and get the camera. Nobody will ever believe this if we don't get a picture.' I returned to the house to search for a while to find our camera to make sure it had film. By the time I returned to the site, the blowing sand had covered the track and there was nothing left to photograph."
So that's where we leave you this week. Lots of interesting stories that have been passed on from generation to generation, as well as some more modern sightings that happen to this day. There is a whole other world out there, folks, in addition to the one that we all know as our reality. And this is just one tiny aspect of that. We hope you learned something here today because we certainly did. And we hope that you will check out some of the books and essays listed in our sources because there's quite a bit of interesting reading in there that we barely touched on.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you'll be back for another installment of Creepy and Weird next week because it'll be here for you. Actually, we've got a pretty good month of January all planned out, and there will be somewhat of a theme the entire month, so be sure to check that out because we're sure that you'll find it pretty darn interesting. Make sure you push the subscribe button on whichever podcast platform you happen to be listening from and leave a rating and a review because this helps out the show. If you want to contact us for any reason, please message us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram or call and leave us a lovely voicemail at 641-812-2635 and we'll play it on the next episode. Until next week, awoo!
Awoo!
That means goodbye.
It's awoo, right?
Awoo.
Awoo.
Awoo!
Goodbye.
Come at me, bro.